I'm Evan Smith, the CEO of the Texas Tribune. On behalf of my colleagues at the Trib, I want to welcome you to this year's Texas Tribune Festival. Every one of our 11 years in business, the work of our nonprofit newsroom has been critically important, but never more than in 2020. We produce reliable, credible reporting on issues that affect everyday Texans, making them better informed and motivating them to participate civically. You and people like you, readers, supporters, attendees at our events, make our public service journalism possible. This month, as part of our fall drive, we're hoping to sign up 500 new members. Donate by September 30th at texastribune.org/give, and your gift will be matched dollar for dollar up to $30,000 by our friends at the Lowy Law Firm in Austin. Now on with the show. I hope you enjoy this conversation between author and teacher Chasten Buttigieg and Kara Swisher, co-founder of Recode and a contributing opinion writer at the New York Times.
Hi, I'm Kara Swisher. I am happy to welcome you to the Texas Tribune Festival, where I'm going to be doing an interview with Chasten Buttigieg. His book is called I Have Something to Tell You, a Memoir. Good to hear from you, Chasten. It's good to have you here. We had a few technical difficulties, but now we're going to chit-chat about your book.
Kara, I love staring at your face for a half an hour, not hearing you and then hearing you. But it's so nice to be here with you chatting.
Yeah, well, let's not talk about technical issues. Let's talk about your book, which I found incredibly touching. And it was an interesting part about it wasn't a lot about the campaign, which I was expecting a lot more about it to be about that. In fact, it wasn't much about Pete Buttigieg, which was great as far as I was concerned. Not because I don't like Pete Buttigieg, but I think your journey was a really interesting one that you've had as a gay man in America, and especially from the Midwest. I'm going to read to you from the beginning. This is my favorite sentence in the whole book, I think. There's a lot of very funny ones. But you said at the very beginning, in retrospect, I would have seemed out of place, even ignoring the fact that I was, unbeknownst even to myself, gay. I was a farmer/actor/nerd you might have recognized from the Christmas tree farm or the recycling commercial, who would often be spotted wearing Hawaiian shirts while driving his 15-year-old minivan to his job as a busboy at a Mexican restaurant. I was clearly a little different. Besides bowling, Odyssey of the Mind, and theater, I could be found at home reading, organizing my extensive flag collection, or down at the barn taking care of animals. And then it hit me with this sentence. Once I started working, my schedule was packed enough that I didn't have time to feel lonely or ostracized, which then got me. The first part, I was like, what a strange young man. And what an interesting young man. And how did you ever get to be gay? A lot of questions there. So talk a little bit about your early days and coming out, because I think that was the most effective story you're telling here, and very important one, especially for young people.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, as I describe, I was busy enough to try to blend in and busy enough to keep going. And in a way, many of those communities that I belonged to were also reinforcing the idea that I didn't belong there. Many of the sort of bubbles I was operating in kept showing me how out of place I was. But my family instilled a very strong work ethic. That's why we were in 4-H from a very young age. And so the moment I could drive, I was driving, I was working, and I was just sort of in constant motion, enough to keep me busy, but enough to keep me thinking about whether or not I really belonged in those spaces.
We'll talk about not belonging, because you did belong in a lot of ways to the community you grew up in your state, and you did everything, like 4-H, for example. My favorite one was the note, "Did you walk your steer?" which is vaguely naughty, but actually, we won awards in 4-H and everything. But so you fit in a lot of ways into the community you grew up in.
Well, I played the roles really well. So when we were in 4-H, I was all in. I took the showmanship classes. I walked my steer every day like you're supposed to. When you have a project, I invested in doing the project well. And, when I put my mind to something, I wanted to win. And so when we went to fair, I was heavily set on taking home the blue ribbon and being the best showman, partially because I thought if I could do those things, that would distract other kids and distract my family from perhaps finding something else out about me. So I thought it would
Right.
be impressive if I was a really good showman. I thought it, would make my father proud if, like him, I had a strong work ethic and I was working 2 part-time jobs while also maintaining a busy extracurricular schedule. And so I did fit in a lot of ways. I participated in a lot of things, but I never did it as my authentic self.
So talk about that, the idea of feeling ostracized and belonging at the same time, because one of the things that was very clear is you also were bullied quite a lot from an early age, which is, I think, a story a lot of gay people have, is that people do sense it, especially people your own age. And in a community like that, you're not living in a San Francisco or a New York or somewhere else where it's more accepted, although not always.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all have had our fair share. If you're in the community, everyone's had their fair share of bullying and taunts. And, at that time, I was so hyper focused on how I looked, how I sounded, how I dressed, which I talk about in the book, which is, looking back is comical, that I thought Hawaiian shirts would be the thing that would help me blend in. But,
Right.
I was terrified of other boys and other people finding out about who I was. And many of the taunts at the time were simply homophobic slurs. It wasn't necessarily a kid thinking that you were gay. It was just tossed around a lot. Yet in the back of my mind, I was afraid my peers were figuring out something about me that I wasn't yet ready to name or even come to terms with. And so I just focused on what I was portraying, who I was to people. And in many ways, a lot of that bullying is quiet or unseen. I obviously have shared this book with a lot of people that I've grown up with. I called them to talk about their stories, their experiences, because I didn't want to paint a picture of something that I thought perhaps was only my experience. I wanted to know what their experiences were too. And one of the saddest conversations I had after the book came out, I sent it to one of my best friends, Hannah, who stood up in my wedding. We went to school together, and she said, I wish I would have known. I wish I would have known that that was truly what you were going through and experiencing. But we were all so focused on fitting in and surviving. And for me, it was literally trying to survive. And, that's where we were at the time.
Well, one of the things you did was talk about the loneliness. It pervades the book, even though you have such a sunny personality, and obviously, I hate to use a cliche, but a Midwestern personality. Trying your best. There's a sense of feeling alone and without anyone to reach out to that's like you.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, some of my closest friends, we never talked about being gay. We never talked about friends that I have who came out after high school. We never talked about it. Even in the comfort and the safety of, in the car or, playing video games in the basement. We never felt comfortable opening up to one another about what we were feeling, what we were going through. And in a way, I just didn't really have role models. I didn't have someone to ask. I didn't have anyone to go to say, this is what I'm thinking. And that kind of set me up for a pretty dark mental health path after I came out, because I kept learning and hearing from people that being gay was wrong, being gay was twisted. I was going to live die and go to hell and live in eternal damnation. And, all of these things I was hearing from religion and youth group and friends, even well-intentioned friends who just people tossed around homophobic slurs and talked about gay people and people who were different in such demeaning ways. And for me, that kept telling me, once these people find out about who I truly am, this fact about me, they will hate me. They'll despise me. Will they hurt me? Will I lose my family? Will I lose my community and my friends? And so there was a bit of loneliness there, going to bed and thinking, who am I to these people?
One of the things that I was struck by also is that you're telling your family was it wasn't a dramatic. Mine was a particularly dramatic story, but that was way, way back in the darker times, even darker times. Your family was somewhat accepting. The one moment got me was when you told your grandmother in the Buick about that you were gay. Of course, she knew. As many people do already know before you tell them something like that. There was the back and forth with your brother and stuff like that. How does your family, how do you look back at that? And then how do you feel today with them?
Well, I had just turned 18 and I was so convinced that it would be the end of so many things, friendships, family, that I would be an embarrassment to my parents. My parents run a small family business here. I thought, will my dad lose business? Will people be embarrassed to be seen with my family? And I and I knew that they wouldn't come out right, and say, get the hell out of my house, no son of mine. But I just thought that it would be better if I left, for everyone.
Which you did. Mm-hmm.
And I did. I handed my mom a letter. I remember it quite vividly. Early fall day, clothes on the line, windows open, mom sitting in her chair, folding laundry, and walked up to her and handed her the note. And I said, "I'm really sorry, I got to go." And I just left. And when I look back and think about what it meant to have a family who reached back out, my mom called me up after a few months and said, "You need to come home." They were terrified for me. They didn't have any answers.
Right.
I mean, they had no idea what it was like to be gay, what it meant. They were terrified for me because they knew life was going to be harder. And to have a family that asks the hard questions and is willing to get it right, who wants to get it right. My family marched with me in pride last summer on the campaign trail, and that meant the world to me to be able to come back home to a family that loves you. Because out on the campaign trail, I mean, I met thousands of people, toured hundreds of LGBTQ centers, and many of the stories I heard from people on the trail weren't as happy. Not everybody gets that happy ending. Many people don't get to go back home. And I'm extremely privileged and lucky to still have my parents and most of my family in my corner. My parents walked me down the aisle when I married Peter. So I count myself as lucky.
So one of the things another thing is that you spent a lot of time sort of having student loans, medical loans, working hand to mouth like a lot of people. And it gives you a great understanding of what it's like to struggle, especially right now when people are out of jobs. And that was another moment in this book that it's quite in depth about how desperate people are, even hardworking people like yourself. You worked in Starbucks, which I love your stories of how bad Starbucks people can be. But you had student loans. That's true. People are terrible to Starbucks employees.
Yes,
you had a lot of you had a lot of experiences where you were working either a service job or an hourly wage, and couldn't pay back student loans. You had a medical issue that caused. In fact, when you told Pete, which you call him Peter, which is interesting, you were worried about that. Talk a little bit about that.
Because I just felt like I had failed from a very young age, that all of these things that built up, running away from home and then not figuring out college, and then graduating college with a ton of student debt. And then, as I describe in the book, needing to go to the emergency room one night and, left the hospital, no health insurance, with over 12 grand in medical debt. And I just felt like I failed. Like I felt like I was playing a game of life and I failed. And I was so focused on why would somebody love somebody who has this medical debt, who has this student debt, who's still trying to figure their life out. I was just starting grad school, because I felt like those things defined me, that those things made me who I was, and what they made was a failure. And
except you were incredibly hardworking. You were incredibly hardworking. It's the story of a lot of people where they think if people have these loans, they don't deserve free college or deserve free medical care or things like that.
Yeah, I didn't know what else to keep doing, though. I mean, I had rent to pay. I could talk to collections agents, every day. The hospital would call, like I describe in the book, and I'd say, hey, I'm working all these jobs and I'm barely making enough to feed myself and pay for rent. I don't know what to do about this medical debt. And they'd be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Can you make a payment of $12,000 today?" And I didn't know what else to do but keep working. And it's just survival mode. And you start paying the minimums that you can, and you just keep going.
How do you look at that now with all these people out of work? And this was during a boom time. This is during a time when people were making a lot of money and things like that. When you're talking to people this is the experience of a lot of people in this country.
Yeah.
When you think about it, what can we do about that from your perspective as someone who's gone through it?
Well, I mean, I don't ever want to claim to have all the answers. Of course, a livable minimum wage would have been nice. And I guess one of the things that would have been great is, or to see now, would be empathy for people. I mean, I don't think this president really cares that people are struggling. I don't think this president cares that people are working multiple part-time jobs to put food on the table and they can't afford their student loans. And I mean, look at how many people are crying out for rent assistance. I mean, to think about every day looking your children in the eyes and wondering, will this roof still be over our head at the end of the month? And this president just doesn't seem to care. I remember many times thinking, like, what is the point? What's the point of getting up and going to work and working 2 jobs every single day to barely make ends meet? And now you see people in crisis lining up for hours just to get food at food banks. And sometimes I just wonder, like, how we have failed as a country. That the greatest country in the world has people, you know, lining up with their kids in the car just to get a bag of food. Again, I don't have all the answers, but I guess we could start with, you know, an administration of leaders who actually care about people.
Well, let's talk also about, you're talking about the idea of dividing people too. One of the other lines I thought was really important in the book was you were swimming in a sea of whiteness, and you didn't see that. Talk a little bit about it, because we're right now in the middle of this sort of people seeing things from totally different perspectives.
Yeah. So I wrote about that in the book because I'm specifically talking about the imagery of the Confederate flag around town, and kids would wear the Confederate flag on their belt buckles, on their T-shirts. They would literally fly Confederate flags from the back of their pickup truck beds, and I never had to examine whiteness until I left Traverse City. And, you know, we're all living in little bubbles, right, inside larger bubbles. And the thing about that was, we never examined our own whiteness because that is how the structure in the system is set up. That, you know, Traverse City is 99 point whatever percent white. And people would joke about the Confederate flag, not as a racist symbol. They would say, why would you have a Confederate flag? You know, Michigan didn't fight for the Confederate South. Yeah. It wasn't, hey, that's a really racist symbol and a really hurtful symbol, because you know, the whiteness of this place, of school, of these structures, didn't ask us to examine that, and we never had to. And there were many things like that I had to leave Traverse City to figure out. And it required, one, obviously, higher education and being in different educational environments, but it also required people calling me out. You know, when I went to school in northern Wisconsin, and that was heavily white. And then I went and worked in schools in Milwaukee, and I had to basically handle and address my ignorance, and in ways where we grow up in these bubbles and we never have to think about it. And at that time, I was only thinking about myself. I was only thinking about my sort of pain, my experience, my trauma as, you know, a queer person, and wasn't even examining the world from other people's perspectives, simply because I was, you know, focused on surviving as myself. And you have to, you know, that's part of growing up, is re-examining that. But Peter and I came back to northern Michigan. We just bought a lake house up here in northern Michigan, and it means a lot to me to drive down some of these country roads and see Black Lives Matter signs. You know, these up north pride signs and rainbow flags, because when I was growing up here, there was this movement to put these "We Are Traverse City" stickers on vehicles and sell them as a rainbow puzzle piece. Like, you know, we're all coming together. We're all Traverse City. And there was such homophobic outcry that people removed them from city vehicles. And now to come home and see people at least having the conversation here means a lot, because what I talk about in the book is, you know, we weren't even having those conversations when I grew up here.
Right. Well, as Angels America said, it's a painful progress. Speaking of painful progress, is one of the things I also liked about the book was you talk a lot about your dating, which seemed hellish for a long time, like back and forth. And you kept writing "men," exclamation point, and stuff like that. You had a series of just bad boyfriends, one after the next, which I think a lot of people have that.
Yeah, you know, that's obviously all in jest. You know, just like,
I get that.
Who hasn't gotten together with their friends and been like, ugh, men? And I think I was doing an interview the other day, and someone was like, do you really think men are, you know, you're talking about all men? I was like, oh my God, no, it's not all men. Like, it's just a joke. It's like, I'm not saying it's like hard out there for men. Absolutely.
No. You're doing the gay men thing. Like, men.
Yeah. Like men are terrible. Like the dates were,
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's part of, I mean, I want
I
the
don't
book
think the
to
straights
feel
get
like
that one. Yeah.
sometimes no, but I wanted people to
No,
get
they
to know me
don't.
for me. And that's the whole point
Right.
about the book, is just like,
Right.
sometimes it's sticky and it's scary and it's gross and it's awkward and, it's heartbreaking. And that those are all the things that have shaped me into who I am. And I want to share those too.
Sure. So, and of course, meeting Peter, as you call him, literally
Yes.
that date where it started on Hinge, where you were in the Chicago airport on Hinge, which is that's a much better service to meet people on, I can tell you. But you started to FaceTime him. A lot of technology involved in your initial meetings.
Yeah.
But the first meeting and the date, which he's talked about and you've talked about, literally is like a Midwestern gay dream. Something
it's
like
a Hallmark
something
movie.
fantasy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a Hallmark movie of the gays. And you saying howdy, you actually said you weren't wearing a Hawaiian shirt, I'm hoping, correct?
I was not. I've moved on from that phase in my life.
Okay, good, because it's been taken up by the bugaloos. So I wish you would not do that. So you said howdy. You actually said howdy, correct?
Yeah, which is silly. And then he said it back, and we were both like, that's my word. I don't know why I say it, but I do.
Yeah.
And I don't know, funny, neat, cute. And then we went from there, and it really was just like exhaustingly wonderful date. Like just so gross.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything was perfect. And,
and you immediately said you wanted to get married and have kids, and you did the whole thing right away.
Yeah. And, I don't know, hindsight's hindsight, but like I had gone on so many bad dates, some of which I outline in the book. And it was like, I'm so tired of meeting people who have got their shit together. And like, I'm still trying to figure mine out. And, and they're just like, you go on a couple dates and then it falls through because you're not impressive enough or whatever. And I was like, okay, dude, we FaceTimed a couple times. I drove to Indiana, we're having dinner, and like, I'm going to do, I'm starting grad school. And life is to always been a dumb. And I think he was a little takes. These are my goals, and this is what I want to do with my life. And that spawned a very long, in-depth conversation. And I was a little afraid of off-putting, but I'm just so tired of going on bad dates.
Right. Well, you managed to get this one to work out because you got married pretty quickly. You were like the marrying kind, essentially.
Yeah. Well, once we got engaged, it was like, I don't really want to draw this out, So we, I think we were engaged in December and then got married in June.
Why was that so important to you? It goes back and forth. There's a joke that only gay people, and that you guys fit both of them, only gay people want to get married and be in the military. But talk a little bit about why you wanted to do that.
To get married?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just, I guess I like certain traditions, and I felt like it was a nice way to honor the other person and say, I'm going to be here for you. And for me, it wasn't as important to be in the church. It wasn't as important to have a lot of those traditions. To me, it was making a commitment to somebody else. And as you read in the book, I had my fair share of heartbreak and some trauma, and to have somebody in your corner who sees you and believes in you and who loves you means a lot. And so for me, that commitment was marriage. It's not for everybody, but for me, that was important.
Were you aware he wanted to run for president like the next day, essentially? Was that something that came as a surprise to you? Yeah.
No, and that developed very rapidly.
Very rapidly. So talk a little bit about that process. I mean, how did you think? Like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, I think, we were married in June, and then by late August, we were having conversations about, the idea of it. We did gut checks around the holidays, and then they were launching an exploratory. When was that? January. That took off from there.
Did you think it would work out?
It was a rocket.
So did you think it was going to be a rocket ship?
No, first. I mean, I believed in him, but I didn't think it would take off the way Iowa to get people to, pay attention. But it just took off. And next thing I knew, I was leaving the classroom because I wanted to be on the campaign trail with him full time, and I wanted to experience that. It was historical moment for our country, and I wanted to be part of it. And it just happened so fast that I was not expecting at all.
What was it like from your seat? And why do you think it took off? What was you talk a lot about watching from the sidelines and people coming up to you and handing you things, even as he was mayor. What did that look like for you? Because being the spouse of the candidate is an unusual and interesting and also powerful role, or it can be.
Yeah. And I learned a lot of that on my feet. I mean, I had a taste of it being, first gentleman in South Bend, but that was really, going to rubber chicken dinners and talking to people in the grocery store aisle. And then when the campaign took off so rapidly, I didn't have a team. I didn't have advisors like he did. And, everyone was kind of just trusting of me. And I just kept being myself. We had a conversation about how we wanted the campaign to go. And I said, I'm not going to pretend to be anybody else. I'm not going to have, people come in and dress me and tell me what to say and what to do. Let's just do it as our authentic selves. It worked for a lot of people. It didn't work for other people, but it was really important to me that as firsts, we go out and do it in an authentic way. And I think that's why it took off. I think that's why people connected to it, because, he's genuine, he's authentic. He brings people in. He talks about things that, people are hurting. They feel left out. They want to belong to something. And I think it resonated with a lot of people very quickly. I also think he's like a ridiculous orator. It doesn't do you any good to try to have a debate with him. So, he's smart, he's quick, and people also want those talents in a president.
Well, people also seem to warm to you rather quickly, and it was interesting because they would you were different. They liked the fact they thought you were the warm one, you were the accessible and the funny one on Twitter. This is your personality, but talk a little bit about that, like being that, like you became a character in the presidential drama yourself.
And that was why, part of writing the book was really important, because I wanted people to see, the full me. I want people to understand where I'm coming from and what has shaped me into who I am today. I genuinely don't believe in putting a lot of negativity out on social media and Twitter. I try to bring people in. I try to invite people into conversations. It's not always easy, but I also remember what it felt like growing up in places where I just didn't feel like I belonged, and I wanted to go out there and help people feel connected to it. But I have to say, I took a little umbrage to people asking about why my husband seemed robotic, or, why he wasn't as warm or bubbly as I was. And I think about what type of temperament I want for a president. And when a president is, sitting in the Situation Room or the Oval Office, when they're making decisions, when they're making hard decisions, do I want somebody who wears their heart on their sleeve and is quick to judge and quick to emote, or do I want somebody who feels so deeply and so strongly but can keep a level, presence? You saw that on the debate stage. Nothing riles him up. He's unflappable. The only time I really hear him yell around here is when the dogs get into the trash, which is far too often. And he's always very, very level. And I thought that was an excellent quality in a president. I remember when someone said, you don't seem to embody the anger of people your age. And I thought that was so unfair, because that means that our anger must look a certain way, that our feelings have to be a certain way, that our queerness must be performed in a certain way, that you have to look a certain way to be successful as a president. And I thought that was misguided and unfair.
That was an interesting theme. And I want to finish up talking about the sort of state of gays and lesbians right now. But one of the things that people talked about was that Pete Buttigieg wasn't gay enough, or he was too straight for a gay guy. And you all were too straight couple-ish. And did you, I like you use the word umbrage. It's an excellent word for that. I want to talk about two things. Why do you think people said that? And then secondly, how do you assess the current state of gays and lesbians in this country? I mean, obviously the Trump administration is laying waste to a lot of stuff that had been progress. So talk a little bit about why you think people did that you got a lot of pushback from gays themselves, and at the same time people are getting attacked as gay people these days in this administration.
Yeah, I mean, we were definitely gay enough for, people on the right to immediately attack us, to show up at our events, to spit in our faces, to pick at us, to protest us, to send us death threats. And then, on the far left, we were called anything from, straight men without women. And, even our genitalia was brought into conversations. And I think, obviously it was a first for the country. A lot of people had ideas and opinions about it. I did it as myself. He did it as himself. I was never going to pretend to be somebody else. What I thought was dangerous, and as a teacher, I'm always thinking about young people, is what are young people hearing? What are they seeing? And when people are saying, they're gay enough, they're not gay enough, they're far too gay, why do they wear that? Why do they look like that? That's sending a message to young people that queerness must be performed a certain way. It must look a certain way. And when we're saying, there's a right and a wrong way to exist, we should remember that there are people in our own community that are contemplating whether or not they want to exist at all. And I thought some of those conversations were really dangerous, especially, I know we don't have enough time for that, but I think when it comes down to, to the end of our conversation here, the state of the LGBTQ community and our country, rightfully so, that we should be focusing so heavily on people in our community who have been, oftentimes turned away from the table, denied a microphone, denied a voice. And I think with the decision right now in the fall of 2020, the decision couldn't be clearer between an administration that actually believes in the life and the dignity of LGBTQ Americans, a president and a vice president who will actually name the violence directed towards Black trans women, and then, one of the most openly homophobic presidents and vice presidents of our time. The choice couldn't be clearer for me. My only hope is that Peter and I went out there and offered people, a different choice. We showed them a different idea, I think many times in rural places, of what a gay couple can look like, what equality can look like. And I felt it. I heard it in many of those conversations, people who would be honest about not always supporting gay rights. And then they heard Peter, then they met us, then they caucused for him, they voted for him. And I think we have to be willing to invite people onto the right side of history, because if we don't, then we just push them into the arms of people like Donald Trump. I hope that the campaign did that for many.
What do you? I just 2 or 3 more questions. When you are thinking about that, one of the best parts was Mike Pence. You were like furious at him, and you watched Peter. It's hard to call him Peter. It's so interesting. Talk to him and deal with him. Yeah. It was a really interesting moment, because you were like, you wanted to huff and say you homophobe or this and that.
Right.
How do you continue to have that?
Yeah, I think, like many people on Twitter would be like, oh, if I was ever in the room with Mike Pence, I'd tell him exactly what I thought. But in some of those rooms that I was in with Mike Pence and Pete, what South Bend really needed was high-speed rail to Chicago. What South Bend needed was investment in infrastructure and education. And that's what Peter was there to talk about. And he's a successful politician because he doesn't return nastiness with nastiness. And he can talk to someone who's so openly homophobic and get shit done. And that's why I really like him. And I also understood, even at that time in political espousing, my opinions about that person can cause a news story. They can flounder projects. I don't want to ever have my actions or words, fall onto the people of South Bend in a negative way. And so I had to, remain composure. And it's not like what I would have to say to Mike Pence would automatically and magically change his opinion about gay people, right? I could say like, hey, I think you're doing a really terrible job as governor, and you're signing legislation that's openly homophobic. And he'd be like, oh, gee, wow, thank you. I never knew, right? Like it's not like my conversation was going to change any of that. And that's why I just loved watching Pete on the debate stage, because people would just throw mud at him and he would refuse to return it.
Yeah. Okay. My last question: what are you doing now? And are you running for president together? I think in a lot of ways. Do you see yourself on the campaign trail in 2024 or 2028, or you could keep going because you're not old and for a long time?
I want Pete to be happy, and this is an honest answer. And everybody asks me this. Right now, I don't care. I don't care what Pete does. I want Pete to be happy, and I hope he stays involved, because I think he's an effective, empathetic politician who deserves to be involved somewhere. I think he's good for America. I'm really enjoying having him home. I'm enjoying cooking meals with him, going biking with him, and just having my husband home. We talked a lot about starting a family, and we're continuing that conversation right now. And so, I don't know what he'll do, and I don't know what I don't take part in a lot of those conversations he has much anymore. I'm really happy having him home. And I want him to be happy, obviously, in his career. So I hope he stays involved, because I saw how many people came out of the woodwork, or how many people were inspired by him and his candidacy. I hope he keeps going in some capacity. But if I'm allowed to be selfish here and honest, which is, a little bit what the book is about, I'm going to enjoy having my husband home for a little bit longer.
And kids.
I hope so. Knock on wood. It's a lot. It's a lot to navigate. It's really hard to figure out. I love kids. I was talking with a reporter, and they were like, "What makes it so hard?" And I was like, "We can't have them. I'm sifting through pamphlets and all these phone calls and talking with friends who've, done surrogacy and adoption. It's so overwhelming, but we're really excited."
Yeah, call a lesbian. I'm lousy with kids. I got so many kids. That's what you got to do. Get yourself a lesbian friend, and then they'll help you with it all. I just had
next
another
time
kid,
Peter's talking about that, I'll just be like, just call a lesbian. Well, congratulations.
Anyway, so last question. 5 years from now, where are you? Where are you 5 years from now?
I don't know. I hope I'm a dad. And if I'm not back in the classroom, I hope I'm doing something that fills my heart, the way it did on the campaign trail. Never thought that's what I would be doing. I love teaching middle school. As long as I'm involved somehow in the arts, or with children, with inclusion, the idea of bringing people together, I'll be happy. But I really do hope 5 years from now, our family is a little bit bigger.
All right. Thank you so much, Chasten Buttigieg. His book is called I Have Something to Tell You. It's a delightful book. Thank you so much on behalf of the Texas Tribune.
Thank you.